Well, welcome back to this final part. It has been, as the weeks go on and get closer to Christmas at work, being in the shipping business, it gets rougher and rougher. I suspect in 2 weeks, I'm going to be like this, talking into the camera, barely able, to figure out what I'm saying. But this has been such a good experience for me. Speaking specifically of listening to Graham Oppy's arguments in this case and dealing with the applicability of mathematics. The reason why is, when you work at a place like where I work, in a factory setting, and you deal with average people, and there's nothing wrong with being average when it comes to these kind of things, it's hard to find people that care enough to actually think about things. They're more than willing to find a criticism of something online, come to work and complain about it, right? But then when you start asking them tough questions, they just fold like a chair, not interested. And this happened to me. I was dealing with a guy who have all of these complaints about certain ideas. And then when I challenged him on a few things, it was just like, I was looking forward to a spirited debate. He just sort of quit talking about it. And it's just part of reality, right? Something you have to deal with. Not everyone takes, and by the way, they may not be worse off for it. But anyway, it's caused me, I didn't realize it till listening to Graham Oppy, that it's caused me to kind of be in a rut for a really long time. I haven't had a passion for philosophy in a while. And so, I'll show that in that I really started to have to dig up some old ideas that I hadn't thought about in probably 15 years. It's been a really long time. So I apologize if, if I seem a little rusty on some of this, because it has been a while, but I've just been thinking about it nonstop. Really, literally, since I watched this discussion between him and Craig about, I watched last week quite a few times and just a few times this week. It's just all I've been able to think about, which was reinvigorated my passion for thought. I'm always thinking. I've been a thinker since I was a child. I've been a philosopher, particularly in the field of ethics, to some degree or another since I was a child. But, man, this has really stretched me to my limits. Now, at one point, Graham Oppy, I'm not a 21-year-old. He was talking about how he has thought about this for 10 years. And I'm like, 10 years? I'm like, I'm dealing with this issue for 2 weeks, right? I've just heard about it, like really literally is the first time I've ever heard about it. And I'm like, it's difficult. And so here this guy has to explain his position in a few segments in an hour-long stream. 10 years of thought. And you see it from the 30-minute mark, and the link's in the description in my first video on this, from the 30-minute mark to about the 50-minute mark, almost exactly. There is a section that I'm skipping entirely because neither Oppy or Craig could really expand on what they were talking about here. And it was so interesting. It was, you got to watch this. It was so fascinating. And I really felt like Oppy had Craig on the ropes. That's just my personal opinion. It had to do with how certain equations, so like when it came to applying relativity to Newtonian equations, you ended up with more than what you needed. And the significance of that portion is just lost on me. And I listened to it multiple times, and it seemed lost on Craig too. And there's no way this wasn't significant. It's absolutely was significant. And Oppy was so fired up to get to the next part that he had no qualms with just finishing that up, and Craig brought up a point and then he just let it go. And I was like, that's really unfortunate. I wanted to hear more of what he had to say because I could not, in that limited time, grasp his point. Now, you want to give a little bit of, Craig and him are peers. They both have a long history in the academic world. And so you want to give them both the benefit of the doubt on some of these things, which is what I'm doing with Oppy. You know, Oppy said he feels like naturalism has better answers, at least in terms of quantity, although he may have meant quality in some sense, but it seemed like, from what I could tell, he meant quantity. Has better sustaining answers to this particular question dealing with applicability of mathematics than theism. And he said, he wrote on this, look, I'm just going to assume that that's true. I mean, it may not be, right? And there may be great reasons to debate every point he has. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? I can't say. The guy's been working on it 10 years. I have no reason to think that he at least doesn't believe that's the case, right? So that's kind of one of the things that you have to really do. One of the problems I had early on, I have to take on a little bit of a pastoral role when I think about these things. I can't help it. One of the mistakes I've made early on is you think, oh, you end up with a kind of a conundrum, and you think you're just going to solve it. You know, young people tend to think this way. Oh, they're just going to solve it. There's a guy I work with, and I said, he loves these kind of thought issues. And so I brought up one that has never been resolved for thousands of years. And I told him that. Now, he's working at a factory, right? And he goes, oh, no, I'll figure it out. He's like 21 years old. He's like, I'll figure it out. I'm like, okay. So people who've devoted their lives to this over thousands of years have not figured it out. And you working in a factory, you're going to figure it out in 10 minutes. And I went, oh, okay, Matt Damon, you can figure out the reference there. It's Good Will Hunting. I'll just say that. All right. So some of my conclusions on this. So Grandma Oppy's final argument, Oppy predicts that that this will land with a thud. He predicts that there will be an emotive response to his argument. And he kind of warns not to be tempted by that. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think Craig, being his peer, can respond any way he wants. He has a history in all these things. But if someone like Grandma Oppy tells you, who's trying to learn, whether you agree with his worldview or not, that's trivial. When they're trying to tell you something and you're trying to learn, and they tell you, really consider whether your response to this is emotional or not. It could be emotive, even though you think you're thinking through it rationally. In fact, I think I caught myself being emotive and didn't realize I was being emotive. And that is really important. And I learned this watching this, is that you have to listen. You can't. That's something that I loved what Oppy kept doing. He kept saying, he would restate what Craig was saying and say, I'm not sure I understand what this means. And he would go through it and tease it out. And I think that's a weakness that I have sometimes when I've dealt with ideas that I don't agree with, is I didn't quite tease out exactly what my opponent was saying or trying to say. And so that's one of the things I took from this. Now, look, I'm not trying to delay getting to Oppy's argument. Oppy's argument is very short. And it's just spurred. But even though it's short, and again, it's probably not actually short. He just had like 5 minutes to talk about it. There wasn't any time. There's no details. It's just hard to but I took the argument serious. That's my whole point. Is that I think the argument's a really good one. And I don't have an answer to it. Maybe one day I will, you know what I mean? But right now I don't, and I have some conjecture. I have some areas that he really got me thinking about, and that I'll present to you before the end of this video. But I will say this, I'm going to take an opportunity to those who may watch this who are not familiar with philosophical issues, particularly Christians who maybe don't think that this adds any value to their lives. I want to ask you Oppy's doing something that a Christian ought to be doing here, and Christians aren't sometimes, and that's using the mind God gave them. We ought to be doing that, and we should be pursuing that. Now, you may or may not gain a whole lot from understanding philosophical concepts, especially at this level, right? But if you've never spent time reading what thinkers have said about these things, I think you've at the very least done yourself a disservice. And if you've never challenged yourself to think this way, I think you should do it. So I would say this is one prescription I'd offer is that if you've never taken a formal philosophy course or haven't really spent much time thinking about these things, I would suggest buying an introduction to philosophy text of some kind or buying a history of philosophy. Don't buy a 600-page book. I mean something short. And there's tons of great little short books out there on philosophy. And just introduce yourself to a few things. I'm going to offer a little introduction right now, all right? And just kind of give you an idea. It's because it's so interesting. Again, I'm a little rusty on some of this, so I apologize if the language is a little off here. But if you do take me up on this and you go read some introduction to philosophy, you may find that I was off on some of the language I use, but sometimes it has to do with where you learned these things, okay? So let's take you all the way back. There's an old saying that says that all of Western thought is footnotes to Plato. And the first time I heard that, I didn't believe it. But, you know, more and more I think about it, the more and more it's true. You may not know this. We actually have no writings from Socrates. We know what we know about Thales and Anaximander, Socrates from Plato. And so then you have, so Plato had certain things. So you've heard the idea of the cave, right? The cave is this idea that there's, I'm going to have to speak quickly here. So the idea that there's these people living in a cave. They're in darkness. They see a reflection on the wall, and it's these shadow beings. And they don't want to come out of the cave. And one leaves the cave, finds out that it's just people. Comes back in the cave and says, you all need to come out here and see this. There's a whole other world out here. And the people, some people stay in the cave, and they just remain in darkness. They don't really ever arrive at any kind of form of enlightenment about anything or understanding. And there was a lot going on here. But this kind of gets you to Plato's thinking about certain things. For example, ask the question, you know, what makes a table a table? What gives it its tableness? Now, you may think that sounds silly, but I'm just fast forwarding here. There's a lot of reasons to arrive at this question. Again, like the cave, there's something beyond us that can be understood to help enlighten what we don't know in this world. So you see how the cave illustration, although he didn't directly tie that in, I don't believe. I just think that's generally the way Plato thought, is that we should be going outside of wherever we are to arrive at answers. So the way my professor put it was, imagine a museum in the sky. He was really good at these kind of ridiculous illustrations. He was entertaining. He'd go, imagine a museum in the sky. And in this museum, the sky is the perfect rendition of everything. The quintessence, the fifth element. Anyway, the ultimate version. Quintessential. And in this museum in the sky, you have this perfect version of a table. And that's what gives a table its tableness. Now, Plato's most famous student is Aristotle. And Aristotle comes along and he goes, no. In this, now again, you're seeing the footnotes to Plato begin, all right? And he's like, no. What gives a table its tableness is in the table itself. Now, on the surface, this sounds way better, right? Much more reasonable. You know, it has like an efficient, you know, element to it, which is to say its purpose, right? You don't need to be placing something on a table for a table to have, you know, a purpose, right? For a table to be a table. It has accidental qualities, so its color, its size, what it's made out of. Table's table, you know, and it has formal qualities, which is its form. Now, but oftentimes what's subheaded with formal cause is essential qualities. Now, accidental qualities, you can break down, right? You can say, hey, you can remove a leg, you can change the color, it still will retain its tableness. But if you break down its form, it will begin to lose its essential qualities. And you say, okay, so what are those qualities? And oftentimes, to quote Daniel Dennett, they'll appeal to like an intuition pump. Now, that's not by itself a bad thing. It's a way of illustrating a point to emphasize a point, right? That feeds it's a way of getting a philosophical idea to you through your intuition. And you would do this with the best impact. And my professor was really good at this. And he would say, yeah, you just take a hammer and smash the table to smithereens. And at some point, it will lose its tableness. It will lose its essential qualities. Well, that's an intuition pump when it replaces, objective concepts like arriving at what gives a table its tableness, what is its essential qualities is a problem. And so you end up with Aristotle's answer not actually being the death knell in Plato's. Now, this is a long time ago. This is before Christ, right? This is a long time ago. And I think my dates are right on that. Anyway, later on, let's take another example. You move on and you have the empiricists versus the rationalists. And the rationalists believe you arrive at knowledge on things a priori. And the rationalists believe that the empiricists believe that you arrive a posteriori, which is you need tabula rasa, a very famous clean slate. And as you have experiences, you build on your knowledge and so forth. And later on, even further on, when we get into epistemology, which is knowledge, you have the internalists versus the externalists. And they're basically saying, how do we arrive at justified true belief? And the internalist says these conditions are figured out through internal means. And externalists are trying to prevent accidental conditions from being the problem. To give you a quick illustration, the spoiler alert here for this is Taxi Driver. And Taxi Driver, you get to the end of the movie, and he's going to assassinate this politician, and he ends up accidentally saving the politician, and he becomes the hero. But he's not a hero. As the audience member, he's not a hero at all. He's actually the villain, but that's the way he's seen. And so you can be right about something completely by accident. So justified true belief can be justified by accident. And that's what the externalists are trying to prevent. And so that's the debate there. Now, let's go to our time between Craig and Oppy. This debate is still lingering about. Now, Oppy's point here he wants to make is that the naturalist has resources. That they can say, look, and here's really the argument. It's really simple. That at the end of the day, this is just necessity. That in all possible worlds, this is just necessary. The relationship between the applicability of mathematics and given these other debate points, which I think Oppy did a good job on. Given, for the sake of argument, these other debate points, that it's just necessary. Now, you may think, well, this is why he urged you not to be too emotional about it. You may think, well, now, wait a minute. Hold the phone here. What do you mean necessary? Well, think about this for a minute. There are some things that are kind of necessary. Take proper tautologies. Law of non-contradiction. It's just a tautology. At some point, you have to say, well, this is the end of our extent of our ability to reason. And that's what Oppy basically says. This is the end of our extent of our ability to reason through this, and so it's just necessary. In fact, this is kind of what Plantinga does with his look at, I forget the terminology he used, I apologize, where it's rational to believe something you can't necessarily prove. And he puts God in that category. And so he arrives at the idea that it's rational and you're warranted to have knowledge. Now, all right, on to my response, because I have very, very little time. I just got away from me, and I apologize if I rambled a little bit there, but I was hoping to offer kind of a history of philosophy and show you it's worth your time to look at. I do have a little bit of a response. At one point in Oppy's, again, don't even take it with a grain of salt. I'm just really demonstrating that how he got me thinking about things. I don't even know if this is necessarily all that great of a response. But he said, let's take all possible worlds. some conditions of this world would have to remain. And he uses the term, in all possible worlds, chances play out differently. Now, this may not even affect his bottom line here, although he brought it up, and I think he was trying to demonstrate that this makes this a metaphysical argument, which I think he wasn't satisfied with Craig's response. Craig's response was, well, there could be a possible world where there is no physical universe. And Oppy said, well, no, this is I'm making a metaphysical argument. Now, I thought Craig was also making a metaphysical argument. Apparently he wasn't. And I just have to take Oppy. There wasn't any more time. So I have to take Oppy's word for it. But so I decided to think about it in Oppy's own terms. And it may not really matter, just to ensure that I'm kind of in the realm of the metaphysical. And I'm not sure. It appears to me that Oppy was using chance in this case as having some sort of causal power. And the taxonomy on chance can be misunderstood very easily. I'm not saying he misunderstood. I'm sure he's considered it. Trust me on this one. But think about it this way. When it comes to probabilities, there's a chance my car will break down on my way to work. I think I'm going to go to work, right? But that doesn't tell me that's not the same thing as chance as causal power. And in this particular case with Oppy, kind of gather my thoughts on this a little bit. He says chances play out different in all possible worlds. He might be saying probabilities there. But the issue here is an assumption that things could play out differently. And it was Oppy himself earlier in the debate that said that we actually don't know the laws of nature. And I agree. And I think that we don't know the laws of nature, and that includes chance. We really can't say that things would, especially in a naturalist system where everything's predicated on something else. The idea that there's a chance things could play out differently doesn't make sense. And the reason why is this is not up for empirical review. We can't go back in time to test whether things could play out differently. And as far as I can tell, in all possible worlds, the nature of whatever chance remains the same regardless. And so there's no real surefire way to, now they give, for Oppy's bottom line, this may not matter. I'm really not sure. He just didn't have time to go over it. So I want to give him as much benefit of the doubt as I can. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like in 2 weeks, I'm not a 21-year-old, right? I'm not going to sit here in 2 weeks, I figured it all out. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he really got me thinking. And that made this worth, I'll never stop thinking about this. I think his arguments are fascinating. Oh man, he may not believe in God, but I'll tell you what, he is a gift from God. Truly, if you can't see that God can use things and use people to bless you, even if they don't share in the worldview. They may be working against your interests as a theist. It doesn't matter. They can be a blessing to you. And he has for me, for sure, and I'm grateful. All right. Hey, thanks for your time.